Hey buddies, Mr. Pugly here, coming at you with another Wonderlands video. Today I want to showcase this Blightcaller Spore Warden build that is able to melt any boss really easily. It's the first day that Blightcaller is out, so keep in mind that there are things that are going to have to be subject to change as we learn more and more about Blightcaller. But right now I have a pretty satisfactory build that I hope you guys are going to like. As you guys saw at the beginning of the video, it's able to kill raid bosses, it's able to kill regular bosses very easily, and sometimes we just get random, I will show the clip again, 38 million damage from one of the Blightcaller skills. So I'm not really sure why it's scaling so high. I know I have a lot of things that are going to make it deal more damage, but I don't think it should be dealing this much damage, but nevertheless, we can abuse it with our build. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of the video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and follow me on Twitch on the top right. You have no idea how much helps me out. And let's get into the build.
Legendary? Whoa! No way, dude!
As in tradition, let's start with the skill tree. Let's go over the Blightcaller skill tree first. And you guys might have been wondering what skill is causing that random 38 million damage, and that is actually the tier 1 skill Geist in the Shell, or Geist, I think that's how you pronounce it. But pretty much every time we do gun critical hits, we're going to have a chance to spawn basically a homing skull that seeks out an enemy. Basically, it's going to seek out the enemy you're shooting. It's not a nearby enemy, I'm not really sure why they say that. It's the enemy you're shooting from what I've tested, dealing poison ability damage. Now this is going to scale based off the gun crit hit damage, but once again, I'm going to play the clip. I don't see myself hitting the raid boss at all with any gun crits. It kind of seems like it might have triggered the effect without hitting a crit because the weapon I was using was floating past the actual boss, and then it randomly spawned the skull and did 38 million damage. So there's still something to be discovered, I feel, with this skill, but we're able to get lots and lots of gun critical hits very easily with this build, so let's continue down the skill tree. Next we have Active Decay. This is going to be a poison-based build because we want to optimize the Spore Warden enchantment as well as this skull ability. So we have 5 out of 5 on Active Decay for 20% more poison damage. We have Hex Machina, which pretty much is going to increase your fire rate by 15%, which is excellent as a passive for 3 points. But if you swap your weapons, you're going to notice that effect is doubled, which is excellent. I really like that skill. I think it's a must-have on pretty much any gun build. And then finally, we have Flawless Edge. I honestly didn't really know where to put my last 5 points since everything else doesn't really affect my build too much. You could say that this skill could help us keep status effects on there longer, but we don't necessarily need that, and increase the status effect chance. But our gun is applying status effects so quickly that we're going to get 10 out of 10 on Whisper of Rot very quickly. And in case you guys aren't familiar, this is Blightcaller's class feat, which is every single time you play a status effect, and this works with any status effects. So you could just be using poison and get this ranked up to 10 very easily by reapplying status effects. You're going to increase your elemental damage by 2.5% per stack. So that's an easy 25% elemental damage on our build, which is excellent. Elemental damage is a really good stat in the damage formula, and it's really helping out our build. I feel like this class feat is so powerful. It might not be the best, but I'd say it's at least top 3. It's crazy how good this is. But back to the skill tree, we have 5 out of 5 on Flawless Edge to increase our damage dealt based on how full our ward is. I didn't feel like anything else was important. I don't really care about ward restore. I'm not dealing electric damage. I don't really care about soak, and worst curse doesn't really affect us. You could potentially actually use burnt offering since we are using a certain shield to deal fire damage during mobbing to increase your gun damage and spell cooldown rate, but I felt like because we're not 100% going to be using that all the time, I felt like Flawless Edge was a good skill to just use at the current moment. Potentially you have a free 30% all damage dealt on your build, which is really good. Next, let's go over the Spore Warden tree. You might be noticing I'm not actually putting any points in the bullseye as filler. I realize it's a better filler if I use Bounty of Hunt. We need to basically activate our barrage as much as possible to activate enchantments, so Bounty of the Hunt is more important than bullseye to me. The gun critical hit chance isn't really that powerful, as you guys are familiar with, so I felt like Bounty of the Hunt was a lot better. We have 5 out of 5 on Eagle Eye to increase our gun damage, 5 out of 5 on Affinity to increase our Spore Fuse enchantment, which is this enchantment if you guys aren't familiar. Activating Barrage. Gun damage has a 25% chance to cause an explosion, dealing 30% of the damage dealt as poison damage. This is actually ability damage, which means it procs Wrath of Nature, as well as gets more damage when you have ability damage in your kit. So more points in the Affinity, the more damage we're going to deal with the enchantment, as well as Geist. The Homing Poison Skull also deals ability damage, which means that it's going to proc Wrath of Nature and get bonuses with Affinity, which is excellent. And of course, Affinity helping play the angles. Next, we have 3 out of 3 on Quiver of Holding to increase our magazine size, allows us to shoot longer, which is always nice. The Revive Pet ability, no brainer. Windrunner to increase our movement speed and fire rate. Movement speed is actually a bit more important than normal on this build due to the armor that we're using, but I'll get into that in a few moments. We have maxed out Wrath of Nature. It's a very powerful skill. You should always have it maxed out, and as well as Headhunter to increase our gun damage when we hit critical hit spots, which of course is going to help Geist and play the angles, deal more damage. Before I forget, here's my hero stats. I have maxed out Strength, maxed out Wisdom, and halfway into Attunement. Of course, Attunement to get our Barrage back quicker, Strength for maximum DPS, and Wisdom, of course, for DPS as well. Next, let's go into our gear. Now, I actually have multiple weapon choices this time. I know that's not normal for me, but I'm primarily still only like to use one weapon because that's just kind of my playstyle with Borderlands or Wonderlands. I know that's a bit backwards based on the game's lingo of bajillion guns, but I like to focus on one gun personally for optimization's sake. So we're using an automatic.exe, which is poison. Of course, you want all your weapons to be poison with enchanted, the Spore Fuse enchantment, as we said before. Other guns I like to recommend for this build are going to be the Perceiver. The Perceiver is a very good gun because of its hidden effect that I won't get into right now because it's a bit hard to explain. I guess in a nutshell, it does a lot of weird crit damage stuff, but basically if you can get a Perceiver with the correct enchantment, which I don't, you want the Spore Fuse enchantment, you should use that as well. The White Rider is very good. I personally still think that the Automagic is better, but the White Rider is really good for mobbing. Of course, you could use a Sword Explosion. Those are very generic, easy to use guns on most builds. You can get them in poison, so go ham on that, but I do like to focus on the Automagic. All the clips I used was with the Automagic. Before we go further, I would like to explain our armor choice just because it is going to affect our perception on the rest of the build. Selective Amnesia is a very powerful armor. If you aren't aware, every percent of movement speed you have, even if you're standing still, so say you had 20% extra movement speed with our secondary stat, you're going to get 20% all damage dealt. So 1% movement speed is 1% all damage dealt. So essentially you want to get yourself to move as fast as possible, but you don't actually have to move. You can just stand still and get the full movement speed effect, which is excellent. So the Selective Amnesia is going to allow us to deal more and more damage as we get more movement speed on our build. And of course we have Bounty of the Hunt and Wrath of Nature on our armor piece. We have all damage dealt, gun damage, and movement speed, of course, to synergize with the Selective Amnesia. Once again, all damage dealt is going to help us deal more damage with our Geist Skulls, which is the homing skulls you'll see when we kill enemies later, as well as play the angle cheese damage. Or I guess you could consider both the homing skull and play the angles to be cheese damage because they just randomly deal tons of damage, which is awesome. So that's why we're doing Selective Amnesia, because all damage dealt is going to affect those two skills. And it was the reason why I said movement speed was more important when picking Windrunner, because of Selective Amnesia. Now let's go over to our Goblin Pickaxe, which is a poison goblin pickaxe with the enchantment action skill start, increase damage dealt by 20% for 20 seconds. Once again, all damage dealt is going to help us deal more damage with our Geist Skulls and play the angles, as well as the nifty effect of increasing our cooldown rate with spell and action skills so we can get our burst window up and running quicker and quicker, as well as increasing our movement speed to a maximum of 30%. So that is a 30% all damage dealt at max stacks with our armor piece, which is excellent. Of course, we have Echo to allow us to deal tons and tons of damage with a melee swing after we deal some crazy damage with our ability damage and gun damage. So of course, Echo is an easy choice, as it is on most builds. And I have these gun damage rings that I've had in the past You guys are probably really familiar with this. I don't remember when I first got this. I guess I would have gotten it when Chaos 35 came out. But this is a double-rolled pistol critical hit damage mood ring with action skill cooldown rate. Since we're using our auto magic, we're going to deal tons and tons of damage with this ring because the more critical hit damage we can deal with our weapon, the more damage Play the Angles and Geist Skulls are going to deal. Next we have a Cursed Wit. Now the Cursed Wit, I really do recommend just for bossing or just killing a really hard enemy, because otherwise you're gonna die a lot with the Cursed Wit because your shields are going to be deplete really often because Cursed Wit does have a low capacity. I know this is a very bare bone Cursed Wit. It's not like any chaos level, but the important part, it has on spell cast increased poison damage by 30%, which of course synergizes with our entire build. The Cursed Wit is really going to allow us to optimize our Geist Skulls as well as Play the Angles even more, which is of course the reason why we're running it. But if you're regularly mobbing or you feel like you're dying too often, I do feel like the Body Ruin is a good alternative because you're going to get your HP back quicker as well as deal bonus fire damage, which can help apply another status effect. And I believe I stopped mid-sentence on a certain thing that I was trying to talk about earlier. Our survivability on this build is a bit skewed due to the fact that Selective Amnesia is going to occasionally deal environmental damage below our feet, which can negate health gate and down us really quickly. So if you want a more beefy shield, Body Ruin is going to heal you up potentially faster than the Selective Amnesia is going to kill you. Speaking of survivability, of course we're running a Sacrificial Skeep Amulet with poison damage and Spore Warden power. The more Spore Warden power we have on this build is going to allow us to deal more damage with Play the Ankles, which is the reason why I have a Spore Warden amulet, as well as Blightcaller did just come out, so I mean, I haven't had time to really farm anything specifically for Blightcaller. I still feel like Spore Warden's power is still good on this build. Perhaps Blightcaller power is going to be more important in the future. Only time will tell. But the Sacrificial Skeep will help us heal. I was debating on using a Protagonizer on this build. I couldn't find quite a good Protagonizer. It's Frost and Dark Magic, but they're both Spore Warden, thank God. But they're not really good enough for this build, and I felt like, albeit increases our ability damage with the critical hits, it wasn't enough to really warrant us dying constantly, and the Sacrificial Skeep Amulet, of course, increases our survivability so much that it really just helps us stay alive, because Selective Amnesia really tries killing you really fast on this build, and on most Selective Amnesia builds. If you can get into the rhythm of using Selective Amnesia and kind of learn what allows you not to take as much damage when using it, of course you'll survive better. Basically, the gist of it, from what I've discovered, is just the jump constantly from all my Selective Amnesia builds, so hopefully that helps you. It mitigates a tiny bit of damage, but you will down often with this build without something to heal you, so that's why I was recommending the Body Ruin as well as a Sacrificial Skeep. Next, of course, we have a Buffmeister. Now the Buffmeister we're using, it's very important to get a poison one for obvious reasons, to increase our poison damage, but as well to get Ka-Chow, because Ka-Chow is going to increase our ability damage by 80%, which of course increases the damage of Play the Angles, Spore Fuse, as well as the Geist Skulls. And that feels like a tongue twister, Geist Skulls. But anyways, you want to make sure your ability damage is to the maximum on this build. So that really helps you turn it up another notch, as well as increase your movement speed by 80%, which means 80% all damage dealt with Selective Amnesia. So, you know, it's kind of invaluable on this build. You want to, of course, use it on this build with the enchantment on active skill start, increase gun damage by 40%. And before we go any further, I did toy around with a Cursed Wit whenever you reload, gain no charge or barrage. I didn't feel like it was necessary, but maybe if you guys feel like it's necessary, you could use it. I felt like I was getting barrage often enough where I didn't need this, but I don't know. That's just a suggestion if you feel the need to. And then finally, here's our myth ranks. Here's my Druid, here's my Archmage, here's my Blade Master, and here's my Deadeye. We have 400 points into myth ranks. And one final thing is a low level Torg weapon or something to self-damage you. Now, the reason why we're doing that is because you can instantly proc Selective Amnesia whenever you need to. If, say, the boss doesn't have like a small hit that will proc that for you, sometimes you want to proc it yourself and then run around. You'll have the Selective Amnesia thing proc, and the Skeep Amulet is going to help you survive as well. So, you know, you can use a low level weapon to proc the Selective Amnesia if you so need to. I've also used it to specifically deplete my ward, which is why I have a shock one. Depleting my ward is beneficial because it's a Cursed Wit. I did deplete my ward with the loot die on some of my clips at the beginning. But the final thing to show is how the build actually performs. So let's go into a normal run just so you can see how powerful this build is on regular mobbing. I am going to keep my Cursed Wit up, only because I don't really care if I go into Save Your Soul. I kind of play really recklessly all the time on most of my builds, so I don't really care often about that. So of course you want to activate Barrage as soon as you see an enemy so you can start actually dealing damage. You'll notice that as you shoot the guys, you're going to see Geist Calls spawning all the time because the auto magic has lots of bullets that are coming out of it, which means you have more chances to proc crits, which is excellent because, you know, Geist Call or the gas, what is it? It's not Gas Call. I'm thinking about Borderlands 3 now. The Geist Skulls are just insanely powerful, so you can kind of just let them destroy any target you come up to. Keep in mind, the Geist Skull does spawn in front of your character, so if you're shooting an enemy, it's going to spawn off of your character, not on top of them. So if you're shooting an enemy that's really far away, expect to wait a few bits before the skull actually reaches the enemy because it does travel rather slow. Which is the reason why, once again, I like to use Cursed Wit, because it encourages you to get really close, as well as make the Geist Skull immediately explode in their face, which is excellent. This build is rather self-explanatory. Pretty much, as I said before, you want to activate Barrage and then just go to town on any enemy you see. It's very easy to kill pretty much any enemy you see with this build, whether it's a random skull that spawns, or a random play the angles, or just generally good damage. Like that gun damage, we just melted that guy without the skull even touching the enemy, so you're able to deal lots and lots of damage with this build, just baseline. Blightcaller does seem to be a bit stronger than most classes, it feels like. It's possible that the class is just a little bit overtuned, perhaps? I'm not really sure how to say it without coming off like mean, but it does feel like the class is a bit stronger than most classes at the start of Wonderlands. But I mean, it is a new class, they did want to sell it, and it certainly is very powerful, so it makes me want to play it. So hopefully we can see more Blightcaller builds as we go along with Wonderlands, and hopefully more optimized as we learn more about Blightcaller. But I'm going to spawn a Elite Challenge Room just so you can see the enemies that spawn, even in Elite, are going to die very quickly. As you can see right here, this enemy died in just a few moments, and as you saw right there, the Selective Amnesia did down us after getting shot by the enemy, which is, you know, as I said before, a big part on why Sacrificial Skeep is so important on this build, because the Selective Amnesia, once again right there, will kill you very easily if you're not playing carefully or not realizing that it's proccing off of enemy hits. Keep in mind, we do have an Echo Hilt mod, so make sure to melee occasionally to get a random kill such as that. Now that wasn't quite a kill, but it was a decent chunk off of its HP. So as you might have saw during some of my clips at the beginning, I even meleeed some bosses because it allowed us to kill the bosses quicker. And you can see right here, here's a poison resisted enemy, and we're still able to kill them very quickly. So you don't have to worry about resistances unless there's an immunity that prevents you dealing the actual poison damage. You should be fine. You shouldn't have any problem killing even the most resistant to poison enemies, as you saw right there. Now this is going to be a gauntlet style room, and this is a great showcase of the ability of this build to mob very, very quickly. So I'm just going to, of course, activate Barrage. Some enemies behind us died, probably due to the fact that Play the Angle procced. Perhaps it was a Geist Skull, but I'm not even activating my Buffmeister throughout the most of the showcasing of this build, and we're able to kill all these enemies without really any problem. Now, for this boss, I will activate our Buffmeister, just so you can see the damage off of that. And of course, that wasn't a great showcase because we got downed immediately. But of course, we're able to kill him really easily. And I'm not really sure why that didn't bring me back up from Save Your Soul, but you get the gist. We're able to kill really quickly with this build. It was really fresh learning a new class and experimenting enough to make a build deal this much damage on day one. But once again, it is only day one. Perhaps we'll learn more about the class so we can make this build even stronger. But at the current moment, I'm really enjoying this build, and I think that you guys would as well, and I strongly encourage you guys to try this build out. It's really fun to have an optimized poison build. Of course, we could have had an optimized poison build in the past, but Blightcaller makes it easier with Active Decay. And as always, a big shout out to the members who make these videos possible. We got Clairvoyance, Rick and Glacius, Gravewolf, Cameron, Benjamin, Wishkeeper, and 31 Bar 70. These are the people who support me as little as $5 a month, and you can also support me as little as $5 a month by clicking the link in the comments or description or in the top right to become a member. The more members we have, the closer I get to becoming full-time, which means more videos for you guys. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Bye-bye.